Hello, everybody. We are going to get started in just 15 minutes. We'll give maybe 2-3 minutes, let everybody join in today. We have quite a few folks registered, so feel free to sit back and listen to some elevator music before we get started with everything here today. I see some familiar faces in the registrant section here, so I'm super happy to see everybody. We've got some old faces in here too, and some new. This is great. I love seeing everybody in here. This is also great to see the variety, the number of people that are attending here today, and being able to see all the different states represented, all the different accounts represented. So I'm very happy to see just the wide variety of everybody. Great. We are going to get started here in just a couple minutes because we got a lot of content to get through here today. So once again, I want to thank everybody for joining. We are going to go ahead and get started with Pharmacy Revenue Mastery today. So today's webinar is going to be featuring Andy and Jesus today. We're going to do a brief intro here in just a second, but I also want to just do a few housekeeping points here for everybody that's online. We're expected to have somewhere around 100 or so folks joining in. So just a couple of housekeeping things. If you wouldn't mind, just double check, make sure you are on mute as we go through here today. There is a chat section as well. So if you've never used Livestorm before, you do have a chat section, and we have quite a few moderators online here today. So please feel free as we go through the webinar today. This is meant to be interactive. So definitely pop in questions into the chat section. Depending on time, I'm going to probably throw out a few questions to you guys and pose them back to our guests as well. So please feel free, go ahead and pop into that chat section. I do see a lot of familiar faces, which is really great. Appreciate everybody joining in here today. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Today we are featuring two of our current pharmacies on DocStation, Lino's and Saenz medical pharmacies, and we're going to go through with just a couple of brief introductions. So myself, my name is Rachel Matz. A lot of you online here today have messaged or talked or spoken with me at some point. I am now the head of clinical solutions here at DocStation, been with us for about 4 years or so. We also have a couple of moderators on today. So Malia, I know you don't see her in the section down at the bottom for presenters, but Malia White is our head of pharmacy success. She's also been here for about 3 years or so. And at one point or another, I'm sure most of you guys have spoken with Malia. She is our new head of pharmacy success. And today, highlighting two of our distinguished guests, we've got Andy Silva, PharmD from Lino's Pharmacy, and we have Isaiah Cruz, or Jesus Cruz here, pharmacist in charge over at one of these Saenz locations as well. So just a couple of brief introductions again, but before we really dive into the meat of our conversation here today, I do want to make sure I focus on a couple of things for you guys and making sure to really set the stage and set the scene of some of the things that we want to accomplish here today. And what I would like to do is be able to highlight not just the importance of medical billing. We see a lot of conversations now with how important medical billing is. Really what I would like to do is be able to focus our conversation today on how you did it. Not just the importance of medical billing, because we know that that's where the future lies, but how these two pharmacies were able to adopt this into their workflow and make it a successful practice. So a lot of my questions here today that I'm going to pose back and forth are really about the how and focusing on the strategy with both of these here today. So wanted to make sure to do that and focus on that here today as well with you guys. I would like to also, go through and make sure that we're talking about the best practices, not just how these folks did it, but the learnings that they accomplished along the way. And really talking also about what were some of the setbacks, what were some of the roadblocks, being transparent around that, because I do think that as folks really start to adopt this clinical shift, it is important to recognize what things kind of stood in the way and how do we overcome those barriers. And lastly, one of the things that we want to focus on, again, time allowing, because we do have a lot of content today, time allowing, I would love to focus on a couple of things where both Andy and Jesus, where you guys see pharmacy and medical billing going in the future. So just to set the scene and some agenda items here for you guys today. And again, once again, if you are just joining in, we do have a chat section. So definitely feel free to make sure you can pop in any questions that you have as we go through as well. So I do see a couple of you guys popping into some questions, and feel free to do that as we go. All right. Beautiful. Okay. So I'd love to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about where you started, where you came from, and really kind of this journey of medical billing. And so, Andy, I'd love to start out with you and asking what were some of the key steps that you took in the beginning to really establish, a good foundation for medical billing?
Okay, so yeah, well, hello, my name's Andy Silva. I go by Andres too, but yeah, my nickname's Andy, so that's fun also. So I mainly graduated basically from UT Austin College of Pharmacy back in the class of 2023. So I've been 2 years with Lino's Pharmacy. I was always really interested in independent pharmacy as a whole, mostly because of like the endless opportunities that you can do, less red tape considered when you're comparing more chain pharmacies and stuff like that. So when I started with Lino's Pharmacy, I did know that with Jesse, he provided like a lot of different opportunities, and he did do a lot of DME billing and stuff like that with FDS. But when we discovered DocStation, we realized that a lot of the codes and a lot of the billing that medical billing does provide, we were kind of already doing those types of things, but obviously we were doing them free of charge. So that's where we decided to kind of enter the avenue of trying to study and see which type of codes are out there in terms of being able to bill for simple consultations as if you're doing like a MedRec, to even more of the building blocks of counseling, for example, 5 to 10 minutes on like patients' blood pressure medication, diabetes medication, even when it comes to like administration for insulin, GLP agonists, things like that. Because where I'm at right now, where our locations are at, we're in a really small town. So a lot of these patients, they'll come to you for anything. And I feel like when it comes to independent pharmacies, sky's the limit in terms of providing these services, but actually getting paid for them as well, because it's tough. It's tough nowadays, mostly for independent pharmacy, when you're filling prescriptions on the pharmacy side, but you're losing on the billed prescription as well. So you would want to kind of even that out and make up for those types of profits too. So mainly started by doing that. So with DocStation, I kind of like took it as my little baby, and I was the one that kind of like took a hold of discovering what codes are we able to do, what other codes are pharmacies doing in Texas. So then that's where CPSN plays a big part, because with Angelina, she's in charge of medical billing for a couple pharmacies that she works for up in North Texas. So we were meeting bi-weekly with her, and I know we were meeting with Rachel and Malia. That's where we all got to know each other through there. And we started to discover the different codes that they were using in different pharmacies, and the amount of information that they were collecting to be able to send to payers to justify as to why we were doing this and just where it can end up in the future and stuff like that. Because of course, and I always tell a lot of my colleagues this, a lot of the people that I graduated, I do see independent pharmacy kind of like cryptocurrency right now, where it's like always climbing, right? It can go up and down, but I do see it in the future climbing in the case scenario where we're able to provide so many opportunities for so many different patients, and at the same time try to get paid for them. Of course, I wanted to make sure I stressed this, and I know Isaiah will too, that you're not going to get paid for every single consultation you're going to bill for. Not every single, for example, like in our workflow, right? When one of the technicians that I have as my main biller, she'll have like a good 60 to 80 stack of different blue forms or blue papers where with those codes have that we need her to bill. All of those aren't billable, and she knows that. I've taught her that at the end of the day, we'll end up billing between 20 to 30 claims a day from an 80 to 60 stack, just because not everything's billable. But you have to be willing. To recognize that, because the biggest thing is that pharmacy as a whole, we don't want to show ourselves as a red flag saying that we're billing so many things because we're trying to make up for so many losses that we're losing in reimbursement. But at the same time, we want to just recognize that we're able to do these types of services. So just to hone in, I was the one that basically started with.
No, that's great. I'd love to touch on, I mean, maybe something that you mentioned to start with is a lot of these things are services that you're already doing, right? So it's not necessarily outside of the scope of things that you're already providing. Now it's just about recognizing the actual opportunity that you have for reimbursement. Yeah. And so I think that that's a really good starting point for a lot of folks, is to understand things that you're already doing, right, to be able to bill and see reimbursement for it. And Hayden, I see you popping in some questions. I'm going to definitely ask Andy to go through his process here in just a few minutes so you can learn more about it. But I would love to, Jesus, if you wouldn't mind, talk me through some of the early challenges that you faced. So I know Andy mentioned working with CPSN and their medical billing support group. What were some of the kind of early challenges that you faced really trying to adopt this model to be able to bill clinical services?
Right. So again, thank you, Rachel, and thank you for the team at DocStation for hosting this webinar. My name is Jesus or Isaiah Cruz. I'm one of the pharmacists here at Saenz Pharmacy. We currently have 5 locations, with 4 of the locations working with DocStation closely for about a year now. So it's been a great year, very successful year for us. So we attribute a lot of our success to them. But yes, Rachel, I'll go ahead and kind of touch base on the common challenges. And Andy kind of already faced them, which was some of those codes that are being used that we're currently using here. Some of them come back rejection. And we have to figure out why did this get rejected. You know, we didn't go to school to medical bill. At least I didn't. I didn't go to school to code and that type of things. But so seeing the raw data and the rejections was one of the biggest challenges. How do we interpret this data, and how do we, fix some of the codes that we're using, or maybe some of the amounts that we're using to try to receive payment, or maybe we're billing the wrong payer. Those types of challenges at the beginning were things that we didn't have any experience on how to go about, but through trial and error, we're able to find solutions. One of the biggest things was place of service for us, right? So we were billing out of the pharmacy at the beginning, and we were noticing that nothing was coming back successful. When we changed a place of service to clinic, which means we had to change the pharmacy's taxonomy to a clinic, we had to go about the right process to do that. We started seeing successful claims coming in. So those types of challenges at the beginning and how to circumvent them were one of the biggest things. And of course, also, one of the most common challenges, at least for me, was as a new pharmacist, just like Andy, graduating in class of 2023, finding the time to be able to spend enough time verifying the medications, but also being able to spend enough time at the window, at the front counter with the patient, so that you're able to give the proper counseling and bill properly for the amount of time spent. If you're going to be spending 5 to 10 minutes, well, then you have to make sure you're documenting 5 to 10 minutes worth of notes, so that in case they come back and check your notes, you have that available for them in an audit, for example. Which we have not seen yet on my end, but we're ready, of course. But those are one of the biggest common challenges, of course, time management, being able to stick those into your workflow as well.
And that's really great perspective to keep in mind.
For sure, the finding I don't mean to cut you off, Rachel, but that's the biggest thing, and I know that I can say that for both Isaiah and Fabian, when you have like a really busy store, and like for right now that we have basically like 3 full-time pharmacists, 1 PRN. Being able to find the time to bill and then research those codes to make sure you're properly billing. And then, for example, like if you do get an audit back, I've only had probably like 2 audits, but DocStation has been really helpful with the process with that, providing the paperwork, what to send back, but finding the time to verify at the same time too, because you need to make sure your number one role as a pharmacist is verifying, counseling. And then now we have this additional role as a biller and coder and stuff like that. It does get a little, that's one of the biggest challenges that I have probably faced as well, making sure you have all those roles now.
I really appreciate that perspective on both sides. It actually kind of leads us into our first poll question that I would love to have some of our audience answer if possible. So we do have a moderator that's going to post this for the audience here. I would love to know, and just the larger audience as well, but what were, if you are currently medical billing, let us know. I know this is kind of a short list to choose from, but what are some of your personal challenges with medical billing? I think that both Jesus and Andy touched on claims management or denial, things like that. But it could be different if you are, a baby pharmacy that is just starting medical billing, right? So are you still trying to figure it all out? Are you going through credentialing? We're going to talk, obviously state-specific options as well, right? So some states have the option to enroll and get contracted and credentialed with their state Medicaid programs. Other states like Texas, where Jesus and Andy, it's a lot more challenging to do that, whereas they don't necessarily have a medical option through their state Medicaid. So that's a little bit of a difference, but I would love to know. There is a poll question going out. So if you wouldn't mind, take a peek at that for me. As we move on to kind of our next section, which I think really our audience is going to kind of resonate with. So this is mainly where I want to focus in on some questions here about process and about the how, right? So I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of folks are talking about how right now that, medical billing is important. We all need to do it. But how do you do it, right? And it is going to, to Sharon's point in the chat, it is going to differ from state to state, what you're able to do, how you're able to do it, but really about this appointment-based model, being able to schedule patients when you can, and how to see them in the pharmacy, how to get that information, how to intake that information for your patients so that you're billing the correct thing. And then I think that both Jesus and Andy have touched on this as well, but documentation is a key part of that too. How are you documenting your encounters? And so the reason why I invited both of these folks here today is because I wanted to highlight that both Lino's and Saenz have two different workflows, two different processes. And so I would love for both of you guys to be able to share kind of a little bit more about your workflow. Jesus, if you wouldn't mind, tell me maybe a little bit about kind of some of the staffing adjustments that might have been necessary, because I know this is not something that you can take on by yourself, right? You do,
right.
You need to have somebody there. So tell me a little bit about some of your staffing adjustments that you knew you had to make, or at least maybe you learned that over the course of being able to do medical billing within your pharmacy.
That's a great question. And we have actually revamped our staff because of this. So I'll start. Each of our pharmacies has one pharmacist there at minimum. We don't really have two at each, so it's only one sole pharmacist to do the verification part. So we do use a lot of our technicians at each of our stores to help us with this. In fact, at my store currently, I have two full-time, two part-time. All four of them know how to medical bill. And that's a minimum of at least drafting a claim for me, being able to put the right ICD-10 codes, CPT codes, and bill that way. So my staff have all been trained. Now, in terms of staffing adjustments, we've also had to hire extra additional staff to help with reconciliation of claims, to help keep up with the amount of claims being produced every day. And if one store seems to be kind of falling behind on keeping up with the claims, because it can get a little bit overwhelming at times, and there's no denying that. I want to be very honest. There are times where our stacks are a little bit thicker than other weeks. We will send staff around to make sure that we can complete those and don't fall too behind on those. Even though the time period for most claims allows a couple months before you're having to actually bill it, we still want to make sure we keep on top of that. So yeah, all of our staff are trained to do it. Only one or two really more advanced in terms of helping me read rejections and on how to fix the rejections, but at least at minimum, everybody is able to draft a claim.
Tell me a little bit. So, I know that DocStation has sort of an automation process that will help find billable opportunities and draft some claims to review. Now, and again, not everybody uses that particular workflow, but tell me how that's kind of helped within your pharmacy, being able to maybe target some NDCs for intervention. And so for everybody listening here today, DocStation has integration options with different dispensing softwares that you can utilize, where you know that you're going to dispense Narcan, you know you're going to dispense birth control. And so with that, there is an assumption made that you are going to provide some sort of consult with those encounters. So walk me through a little bit, Jesus, on maybe how to use like DocStation's automation process, and then how does your documentation flow into that? So what are you doing when you know you have a billable opportunity? How are you documenting that encounter? And then what steps do you take maybe the next day with your staff to complete that claim on DocStation?
No, that's a great question. So I'll use the example of an antibiotic. With an antibiotic, it's preventative medicine. Most of the time we bill a preventative counseling encounter at minimum. And with the automation tool, you're able to capture all the antibiotics, for example, that are currently in your workflow that have an opportunity to be billed. One with the payer that we've seen success with, because you don't want to be billing every antibiotic if you know the payer is not going to pay. So identifying which payer that is, whether that be a Medicare claim, whether it be a private insurance claim, and as well, my technicians, my filling tech has actually put one of these DocStation templates that we use, and it actually here every single basket that has an opportunity before this basket comes to me, it already has a paper in there. So it already has all the patient's information. I'll have what medication it is that they'll be picking up today. And with my template, I'm now able to identify what's the subjective of this interaction, right? So why are we doing this? What's the objective of this? What is the assessment that I'm making today? And the plan of today's encounter. This is a SOAP note, right? So on our template, we've actually encompassed the SOAP note template. And with this opportunity, when we finish that interaction, I can document there any additional notes that haven't already been documented. Of course, you want to go through basics, side effects, when you should not take this medication, with drug interactions. Same thing you would with any type of interaction, but in case a patient has any other questions, you still have space to go ahead and document that. Or if maybe you want to see them in a couple of weeks to see how their blood pressure has been affected by this interaction, and you can go ahead and document that as well. Now, the following day, once we have my technician come in and look at all the documentation, she then goes in DocStation and go ahead and submit it through there, whether that be a draft that's already been populated there or manually doing it herself.
I love that you mentioned your SOAP note documentation, because I think so many people hear, antibiotic consult are like, well, I can't bill for just, do you have any questions? Yes, no, bye. No, this is a conversation that you are having, an in-depth conversation you're having with this patient, where it's the first time that they've ever filled this medication. So you're providing additional education and resources potentially for this patient. Again, if you needed to take their base blood pressure and then check it again in a couple of weeks. So these are things that are more in-depth than just, making sure to check the basics, right? So I love that you mentioned you have a SOAP note for each of these encounters, and being able to document those interventions that you're performing for your patient. Now, they can, of course, get more complex. So I'd love, Andy, if you can kind of describe maybe some of the same scenario for you, and talk a little bit more about your workflow when you know you have a billable opportunity. What things are you documenting, and the steps that your staff takes as well?
So for me, at both our stores, both Lino's 1 and 2, so we try to have 2 pharmacists there at all times. I know Monday through Thursday here, our most busiest store, Lino's number 1, we have 3 pharmacists sometimes, at least for 6 to 7 hours of the day. That's what we try to. When we started billing, it became more of like a pharmacist project, to where like if the pharmacist was going to recognize if it was a billable billable opportunity or not. So upon verification, that's where at each of our pharmacist stations, we have this like blue paper I had mentioned prior that I had sent you a PDF of it where you can show it out too. But like the reason we have it as a blue paper is because our workflow now has been integrated to where our clerks in the front working the registers, they'll automatically call a counsel and set the patient aside, because it might be a little bit longer to do that counsel and to have that conversation with that patient. So, and I love that Isaiah mentioned antibiotic, because those are the ones that you kind of start with, that code, that 99401 that we started learning, was one of the first codes that we started learning. So a lot of my templates that I created in the beginning centered around antibiotics. So whether it was a penicillin, cephalosporin, you have your tetracyclines, or even, for example, once you start going to like deeper conversations where you will have with the patient, like for an H. pylori, counsel too for a longer duration of therapy and stuff like that. You know, you're going to talk to them for a long time. We'll attach like stickers of each label on this blue paper. We'll check mark what code it's going to be, so my biller knows. And then she'll go and follow the templates for each claim that we've created. I love that you mentioned the automation because, like you said, different pharmacies can use the automation because it might be easier for them because they know that they have a lot of insurances that are going to be billable claims. But for us, since we're more in a rural town, Medicaid is huge. And I also love that you mentioned Medicaid in Texas because right now we're in the process of trying to be able to bill for Medicaid councils, E&M, stuff like that. Right now, we don't have that luxury in Texas. Hopefully in the future, we'd be able to have it. But for us, I think both my biller, which I have 2 billers right now, we're working on the 3rd one. But all of our pharmacists kind of recognize just if the ID that they have on their insurance card, because I've kind of become a weirdo now, because now I kind of know like the first 3 numbers of a commercial
Right.
insurance. If it's a PPO or an HMO plan. And early on, that was also another challenge too, realizing like, hey, what's the difference between HMO and PPO plans? Am I able to bill for all of them? Hey, I'm not able to. So now I don't have an example of one of our labels, but now when the pharmacist is verifying, like on our labels, we'll have there for if it mentions HMO or PPO plan. If it's an HMO plan, we know it'll be just a regular check-in counsel with the patient, as all counsels are mandatory in Texas and stuff like that for new prescriptions. But for the PPO ones, that's where we're able to toss that blue paper in. Once the bag's in the front over there in will call, my clerks are able to see it. We also put hard stops in the front too. We put counsel doc station. We have all our notes there for the pharmacist to see. They see the hard stop right there. And that's where the pharmacist knows that how they're going to talk with the patient. And then that's how I mentioned prior. I'll make sure to stack up all my my blue papers with a binder clip, and they're labeled with each pharmacist just so my biller doesn't get confused with which MPI they're going to use for the template. And she's able to go and bill it the next day. So she's billing always the day prior at the end of the day, stuff like that. So it's tough. Like I'm going to be honest with you, for a store that's a really busy store where you need technicians filling at all times. So that's where we're at right now. It's really hard to get a technician to kind of focus on just a doc station or just billing because we have our long-term care technician, we have our MedSync technician, we have our order technician who all have different roles and aren't even filling. And then you have your fillers, and then I have my 2 billers. So for the most part in the beginning, it did get tough to try to get a workflow. But now the cool thing, and I really like love to see it, is there like my clerk's like, oh, I had a blue paper, like pharmacist, I'm calling it, didn't have a hard stop, but I know there's notes on the paper. I'm calling you now. And then my biller comes up to me. She's like, hey, this medication doesn't have a template. Do you want to add it? Do I have to manipulate a template for you? Do I find the adverse drug reactions to manipulate a template? Because I know you're at what's it called, a scratch for time. I'll do it for you. So it's been a cool thing to be able to see my workflow kind of become integrated on the fact that now I'm doing this new thing. And it'd be cool to be able to see other pharmacies do it too, because I've seen it be pretty successful with me also, where it's not a super hard thing despite being a really busy store, but it is doable. Like it is doable actually.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to pop in maybe and address a couple of questions that have come in through the chat because this is really good conversation. Jarrett, I'd love to be able to see some of yours as well, or address some of this as well. You know, when you're billing a particular prescription to the PBM, you know, obviously you're going to bill to a bin-PCN combination, and DocStation can pick up based off of the NDC and then which bin you're billing for that particular insurance. But more importantly, I think to focus on, we all know you can't bill a medical claim to CVS Caremark. You can't bill a medical claim to Prime Therapeutics. So what for you has been, or how have you been successful in identifying the medical plans in advance, or as part of your workflow? So there obviously are some things that DocStation has, tools to be able to do some predictive modeling and some machine learning, but I really think that a key tool has been just being able to have pharmacies also make those connections. So what are maybe some of the learnings, Andy, if you can talk on that, maybe that you've seen over time, or being able to identify within workflow which of those plans, and then more importantly, their medical plan?
Yeah. So the biggest thing, and I love that you mentioned that question. That was a great question. is now on intake, whether they're coming in with a new prescription that's like handwritten, right? They come in with a paper prescription at drop off, or even if they come in for a vaccine counsel, all medical cards are being scanned in, both medical and pharmacies. So those are at my asset to be able to use if I need it, because I know that I have DocStation always on my monitor and stuff like that. If I ever need it, I've told all my technicians, like, hey, collect all cards. And patients are now seeing upon entering the pharmacy, like, hey, there's a flyer that mentions like pharmacy are providers. Did you know that now we can bill for services? Not necessarily that you have to pay it, but we're going to start billing for your services just in case you get an EOB in the mail. So that's one small tidbit. The other thing, in terms of just not integration from getting insurance cards and making sure you always get them, but the other thing is having Availity portals, United Healthcare portals. Both of my billers have their own logins for Availity. I created them for them, so they're able to see, like, if, hey, they get an insurance card for me and I'm like, hey, check that insurance card. Can you check if it's a PPO plan for me? They'll get in, they'll search up the patient with their ID card since they have it physically, and they're able to check that for me. I'm able to check it too. I feel like I'd really love if those portals were like integrated into our RX queue, but we just don't have that accessibility. We're able to do E1 eligibility, but we're not able to see if it's a PPO or HMO plan. Sometimes I'm able to see it from the ID number, because the biggest thing with commercial plans, and like you said, Prime Therapeutics, they're all going to go to Blue Cross Blue Shield at the end of the day, but the cards look so differently. The letters they start with are so different. You can find little cheat codes here and there to kind of detect them like I have, but it's not the easiest thing to do if you're starting. That's why it's best to make sure you do have those portals, you're getting those insurance cards, and you're starting to really like find a process to be able to check that prior to billing and stuff like that. Because you don't want to, I know Isaiah can say this, but not that we wasted our time, right? There were learning moments, but in the beginning that we were billing, you were kind of like wasting your time and seeing like, hey, PR 197 came back, it's a patient responsibility, but then you get another rejection code and it's like pre-certification. You're not going to be able to bill for it, because getting that referral is going to be a hard thing to do once you're in the pharmacy side of things.
Yeah.
So
I'm so glad you mentioned kind of some of those eligibility checks too. And you know, one of the things that both of these pharmacies have been able to do is really kind of grow with DocStation, and the amount of growth that DocStation has also seen within the last year. We also now can push eligibility checks directly into DocStation. And so you do have the ability to do eligibility checks and see some of those features as well, right? So HMO, PPO plans, things like that. So you do have the ability, and that's been a process, right, over time that we've been able to develop, and these guys have been able to see. But I think it is important to mention that, you know, having a portal like Availity or having a portal like UHC, if you did need to verify insurance or something like that, you do have that opportunity as well. I'm, for sake of time, going to probably kind of push our conversation along a little bit, but I do see a lot more questions that are super valuable coming through into the chat as well. So I do want to make sure we'll have plenty of time at the end to maybe go back and address some of those questions. So Andy, you've talked a couple of times about some of your forms and documentation. We did have a request of your flyer that you post as well, because obviously it's really important, right? When you inform patients that you are now recognized as providers and you have the opportunity to bill for your services, and you should be, right? So a lot of times it's about making sure that that patient is informed and making sure that they understand this is a billable opportunity or a clinical opportunity that you have the opportunity to bill to their insurance for. Whether that comes back as a patient responsibility, might be $20, right, that you're attempting to collect from that patient, or if it's a Medicaid patient that doesn't have a deductible or something along those lines, there's always things that you're communicating to that patient. So I think that transparency is really great. I'd love to know, as we kind of move on into our next poll question here for you guys, but take a look at that, the second poll question that we have, but where is our audience at in your medical billing journey, right? Because everybody starts somewhere. Are you brand new? This is all new. I see a lot of familiar faces in here today. So some of you guys have been billing and you have different opportunities in your state, right? So how you go about learning about the different opportunities in your state. I'm very, very fortunate within DocStation that we have a good clinical research team that tries to stay on top of the legislative updates and the opportunities that folks have from state to state. whether that is Narcan, consultation, birth control consults, whether that's MTM opportunities, things like that we try to stay up to date on. And specifically in Texas as well, the legislation that allows pharmacies to bill to and collect from those commercial insurances as well. So there's all different kinds of things that we're learning as we go, but I would love to know just kind of where everybody's at in your journey. So if you wouldn't mind, just pop into that poll question there. Are you just now learning? Have you been doing this for a little while and maybe just hoping to pick up on some tips? That's also mine as well. We would definitely encourage that. So make sure to pop in that too. I do see a couple of folks popping into just your different states here. I've seen Virginia, I've seen Colorado, I've seen Minnesota, North Dakota, Texas. All of you guys have different billing opportunities. If you ever have any questions, I know a lot of you guys are actually already on with DocStation. Email us, let us know if you have questions about what you can do and how DocStation can help you kind of find those opportunities based off of, either dispense history that you have with a patient, or even how we create some custom options for you guys as well. So thanks for taking a look at that poll question here. I would also like to spend the next maybe 5-10 minutes or so talking about best practices. Now, it's a cliche term, I know, but what are things that have been instrumental? When you think about best practices, we talked about workflow and how that's kind of developed for you guys, but I guess the question, and Jesus, I'd love to pose this to you guys first, but what were some of the most important things that you have found that you've adopted that have been instrumental in your success with medical billing?
I think a lot of that for me was organization. The best practice, you want to be organized as much as possible. Kind of one of the features that you're showing here on the screen with DocStation, I didn't realize green was my favorite color until I worked so much with DocStation, because that means that you're getting paid for something. So what this here is actually a filter of different claims that have come back through DocStation, with the green being paid, the red being denied, and yellow being invalid. So being able to organize yourself on what has come back as paid, being able to put that aside, what is currently has an issue with whether it be the ID number, or what are your invalid or rejected claims, or putting those aside and being able to go through both piles. For us, we actually have integrated a whole different filing cabinet for each payer. And on the top of the filing cabinet is everything that has been, that's pending with a response from the insurance. Everything's in the second filing cabinet is everything that's come back as paid. And the third is just a bunch of other claims that are miscellaneous. Sorry, we'll just say that. So just being organized and not being afraid to spend that extra time going through your claims and, really following up with them once a week if you haven't heard back in a while, and just making sure that, you don't leave anything pending. You want to make sure you're always just hitting those again. So that's what I would say for me is the biggest thing, organization, and using a lot of paper clips to keep things separated from each other.
We try to do away with paper as much as possible, but sometimes it's unavoidable.
It's all we have, at the end of the day. So.
Yep.
I've fallen in love with binder clips. I love binder clips.
Definitely. Well, Annie, I'm going to ask the same question to you. If there's anything different outside of just, being having strategy and being organized, what maybe has been instrumental as far as a practice that you've adopted?
So the best practice that I did, and I wrote this on the little flyer of questions that y'all sent. The biggest thing is reconciliation. I feel like I'm a real OCD person in terms of, like Isaiah said, like if you see a lot of pending and processing from 2 months back and you want to discover as to why those are processing, you always want to know if you're getting paid or not. And I feel like as soon as the biggest thing is before DocStation was set up, like obviously like we were all in the process of getting those ERA setups, right? And in the meantime, it can be a long process of getting those ERA setups for those specific insurances, then getting credentialed. It's all a long process, but you want to start now, and which we did prior to that. You see a lot of processing and you see a lot of pending claims and stuff like that. And then in the meantime, that's where the portals come into play and you're able to find those types of payments and stuff like that. Now it's become more of a seamless process to where obviously my biller has the claims that she needs to bill for the day. And then, like you said, we haven't gotten rid of paper, right? We still keep we keep a paper trail of the claims that are billable that we did bill. The ones that we don't bill, obviously we shred, but the ones that we did bill for the 4 main payers that we have popular in our pharmacy, we go and we file them in, and we try to keep it for at least 5 years for right now. Obviously, this is a new thing, right? So pharmacies have never been heard of medical billing. So for the most part right now, we've just been keeping a paper trail. We'll keep it for 5 years. They're all dated, and they're all, what's it called? They have a flyer in the front with the payers that we're billing and stuff like that, just in case, like Isaiah said, we are ready if we do get audited and stuff like that, if we have to pay back to the payer. The other part of it is making sure that your billers or yourself, just how often you're able to bill certain codes. For the most part, if it's not a traditional Medicare plan, traditional Medicare, you're able to bill certain codes continuously. So like for me, and I sent this flyer to Kendall as well, but my CGM program that I kind of started and I really wanted to begin here at this pharmacy, I have 2 or 3 traditional Medicare programs that you're able to bill for. Obviously, traditional Medicare isn't even heard of anymore. All patients are going to have an ABCD plan. But for the ones that have A and B, I'm able to actually bill for the ADCES, so the diabetes claim that I'm teaching the diabetes training for their certain sensor that they have. I'm able to bill that every 2 weeks. However, for my Medicare patients that have Advantage plans, PPO plans through United, I'm only able to do that code once a month. That's it. So if you're making sure that to avoid having the invalids coming out or even the denials, or for example, I don't see that much denials. You won't ever see that many denials, to be honest with you. The biggest thing that you're going to come back and get are paid 0. And you're like, hey, why'd you pay me 0? The reason is because it's going to tell you right there, this code is not billable within a certain amount of time, within 30 days and stuff like that. So my biller, she does really good. She's like, hey, I see a 99212 from 1-3. We're barely 2-5. 30 days haven't passed yet. We need to make sure we toss it away. You can't bill it. So that's the biggest thing, making sure that pharmacies are shown as green flags to insurances and stuff like that, because we don't want to be overbilling at all either. The biggest thing, and I remember I was speaking to a doctor that was around close to our town, and I asked him, I was like, how many patients do you see a day? And he's like, well, on a non-busy day, I'll see 10. On a busy day, I'll see about 15 to 17. Pharmacies are seeing about 800 to 1,000 patients a day because we're filling that amount of prescriptions. I'm probably counseling on 400 to 600 of those patients because they're new prescriptions, right? Or even maybe that's probably exaggerating. I'm probably exaggerating, but between like 300 and 400 of those patients are new prescriptions, right? You're not going to be able to bill for 300 or 400 of those new prescriptions. They're not billable claims. Either it's because of insurance, it being an HMO plan, you already billed it this month, and stuff like that. That's where, if you really want to bill for a claim, that's where you get oriented with the type of codes you can do. For example, the preventable medicine code, you can do, a person picks up an antibiotic 1 month, next month you can do a 99212 for their heart medication, et cetera, et cetera. So those are where the best practices come into play, making sure you get well-rounded with the codes that come out, what you're able to bill for once or more a month. Vaccine medical billing, making sure that you don't double bill it on the pharmacy side with the insurance side, because I've had those messages where the insurance sent it back, hey, did you double bill it? I'm like, no, y'all just didn't see it fast enough. I actually ran it cash on my pharmacy. On the medical side, it's ran already. So those are the different things that come with time, with training, the more that you start to bill and stuff like that. It's also really helpful to make sure you don't do stuff alone too, because it's always good to have second amounts of eyes looking at the portals and DocStation's dashboard and stuff like that too.
I think
Andy, go ahead. No, I was gonna say just like Andy said. I mean, it sounds like a lot of what he's doing now has been clean, seamless compared to where we started. And it was the same here with us. I mean, finding out what paid, the different types of codes that can be used. And just like he said, there's only a couple payers now that we really just stick with. We don't spend time billing payers that we know have not paid or, do not pay. So we want to make sure our thing is very concise, very seamless, as well as the codes that we use. Like Andy said, we also here do CGM trainings. We help patients connect those, and we actually bill for those services. Now, if you look at the language, we actually use Codify, which is one of the websites to make sure we're following the right language.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Great job.
I was going to say, I'm glad you mentioned that too. I have it here on my this because Codify is basic. Like, where is my give me my coding license because Codify gave it to me. Yeah, like the best
And it has the
subscription.
professional definition and it has the layman's terms definition. So you're really able to find out, like Andy said, how many times are you able to bill a certain code within a certain period. That just helps minimize the stress on your end. Now, it does, like Andy said, take a second pair of eyes because this is not something that, we have all the time of the day to be doing, but just being able to find where those opportunities are and, doing them efficiently. I think we're also doing it, and we haven't really shared much of these practices with together, but it's just two pharmacies that have, integrated it and are doing very similar and very successful. So
yeah.
definitely.
I love this conversation, and actually it's kind of stemming some questions in the chat as well. And, a lot of questions that we get at DocStation as well are more around what payers can I bill for, what services can I bill for, and, the worst answer I hate giving is it is state specific, and it's even beyond that, it's payer specific, right? So, in the state of Texas, some payers allow you to have a contract. But payers are also very common to say, our network is closed. Our network is closed, or we do not recognize the pharmacist as the provider, something along those lines. So it's very common in the state of Texas to try to have to, figure out ways to bill as an out-of-network provider if necessary, or really push for an active contract with a commercial payer.
And
so,
I don't mean to cut you off, Rachel. I'm actually seeing the chat too. The in and out of network wording is sometimes very confusing too, because for example, like with United Healthcare, I'm billing even some United Healthcare HMO plans. I'm in network with United Healthcare, right? They're still not going to pay you because it's an HMO plan, because United Healthcare is not used to seeing pharmacies as a set provider similar to a doctor. So that's where it gets really tough. So I'm glad you did mention that, and I'm glad the questions are coming in about that, because even for MCOs and stuff like that, like Medicaid still does not recognize us as providers too, and we're in the process of trying to get them with the taxonomy codes properly showing them, hey, we're a clinic pharmacy and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we still haven't really seen that much success. So I'm glad Isaiah said, like, you kind of stick to the payers that will pay you for the most part, right? If I see a Cigna PPO, I don't have that much Cigna patients in my population over here. I know Isaiah does over there in McAllen, which is probably like 30, 45 minutes from where I am right now. So it all depends on different locations, different populations, what type of insurances they enroll in and stuff like that. If I see something out of the blue, just off my verification window, because I try to label different insurances with a DocStation parentheses over them and stuff like that. And I was going to mention like Liberty. I'm biased. I love Liberty because Liberty is like an EMR where you're able to note take so many things, right? I've never seen Pioneer, but I've seen Computer RX, and I've fallen in love with Liberty. I used to work for HEB, and I feel like the Liberty side has really transitioned pharmacy to be pretty elevated and stuff like that when it comes to note taking. So really, you can really transform your pharmacy system to look a little bit more different to suit yourself in terms of finding these opportunities a little faster.
Not a sponsor, right?
Yeah, not a sponsor. Unless you're out there.
I do want to make sure, Tom is asking a good question too. Are you providing the same services to patients regardless of insurance? And the short answer is yes, right? So you are providing these services, and it's about patient care at the end of the day. That is the most important thing, is patient care. But from a business perspective as well, it's important to recognize which opportunities are reimbursable. And the conversations that we've had here are great, where you recognize, yeah, I might have 400 new scripts a day. There's no way that you can provide counsel on every single opportunity. That's just 400 is too many for one person to do, right? And we all recognize that. It's about really kind of maximizing that opportunity that you do have. And, when a patient is willing and accepting of that consult, being able to take that and then run with it. So definitely having the ability to offer consultation to any patient. Yes, you're absolutely providing those services regardless of patient and insurance. Right. And beyond that, recognizing the opportunity for reimbursement in your state, because it will vary from state to state, of course, but recognizing that opportunity.
And it's definitely like motivating, like when you have a patient in front of you with a payer that pays, and they want to sit down and get started on their CGM training. They want to download the app and go through everything and how to read what a hypoglycemic event is, how to, that just empowers you and it motivates you in a way, because you're about to build this after, and and really hopefully make up for if any losses, or just be able to help your business. So DocStation, I think, has given us the tools from the beginning to not be afraid to make sure that we're trying these opportunities. And now it's just so much more seamless than it was at the beginning, now that we have all this information on both sides.
And I know we didn't move on, Rachel, but the biggest thing too is, does that mean I turn away all CGM patients that have HMO plans? No. You can make your own type of system at your own pharmacy the way you like it. One of my technicians that helps me with CGM installation, because he's taking the ADCS classes too, because I trained him and I got a certificate too, because of course I can't be doing everything. So we even made a flyer notifying patients upon coming in, like, hey, these insurances will pay me for you to be able to do it without having to pay out of your pocket. But if you need to do it, I'll charge you $10 a month, $5 for the first sensor if it's 14 days, $5 for the next sensor if it's freestyle. And then for Dexcom, we'll keep the same process too. You can make your own processes here. The main thing is not turning away other patients just because they're not payable. If you think you can do the service for your pharmacy and the patient is willing to pay out of pocket, that's what doctors do for PPO plans. If they haven't gotten a referral to, doctors are going to charge you that copay. That's technically the copay the pharmacy is charging too. I don't want to turn away patients just because I don't have that payer. If you're not my payer, I could still get paid for you. You can still pay out of pocket too if you're willing to. And if you're not, it's okay. I'll still do the service for you also. You just need to kind of make your system for it also, for the most part.
I think it's really important conversation. I really appreciate it. It's really stimulating a lot of back and forth in the comments too. So everybody who's chiming in and helping answer each other's questions, I love this. It's great. So I'm really appreciative of all that. I think it's a good conversation to have, right? And making sure the dialogue is there. So I want to go ahead and take a look at our last poll question here, and asking more about the types of clinical services. Now, if you're in a position where you don't know what you don't know, that's absolutely fine. So if you don't know what clinical services are out there for you, or you just in a state where you may not have the opportunity, that's okay. It's absolutely fine. This is more just a question. We'd love to know, what types of things are you interested in? But again, there's, I believe now, up to 34 states that have legislation that backs the ability for the pharmacist to be recognized and paid for services. Now, does that mean if you're in a state that doesn't have legislation, you could still attempt to bill out of network? I do want to be clear there. You can bill out of network, but to Andy's point earlier, understanding and recognizing what that means. There are commercial insurances out there or MCOs out there that will pay for those services. But understanding too, when you have a 10-minute consultation for a patient, you're not going to charge $150 for that claim. If that comes back to the patient, they might see an EOB that says $150. So be reasonable on the amount that you charge, right? So that way, when you make that attempt to collect from your patient, that it's not an unreasonable amount to expect from that patient, right? So you set those parameters. And more importantly, like if you have an MCO, they're not going to have that deductible anyway. But I think it is important to recognize, where do you want to start? And if getting started is a huge hurdle for you, so I've seen a couple of comments here, in certain states, we can help you with that process to get started. So if you have, let's take Minnesota, for example, because that's kind of common in the comments right now. Minnesota, for example, right, having, they've been able to bill for 30 plus years. I think somebody probably can correct me in the comments there, but being able to bill for MTMs for 30 plus years for their patients. Now, MTM in the state of Texas is not an option that you guys can bill for. It's not a recognized code. So there are differences from state to state, and we can definitely help set up some time to kind of walk you through what the options are in your state. Absolutely happy to do that, because we have the ability to help there. But I want to also point out your state pharmacy association is also a really good place to start. You're going to have a lot of good resources with your state pharmacy association. I know there's a couple of folks in here from there as well. And that's honestly a really good starting point. They're going to have the ability to direct you in places to be able to do that as well. So there are some clinical services that I've mentioned a couple of times on this call, that Andy and Jesus have mentioned a couple of times on this call. Things like smoking cessation or MTMs, CGM training. These are things and services that provide a service for a patient that are medically necessary. And I really want to stress that to make sure that, that the point is hammered home here. We know the importance of billing medically, but it is the process how you adopt that model. And again, it can be different for your pharmacy, whatever works for your workflow, but start thinking about the services that you want to start providing. Consultations that most likely you're already doing would be an easy place to start, an easy way in. When you're administering a vaccine, how many of you provide an assessment at that same time? And you walk through 10-minute conversation. It's an appointment-based model. You've got your patient that's scheduled an appointment. You're walking through that assessment with them, and you're providing additional resources. Of course, this is not just a clinic setting where it's, 5 minutes, bye, see you later. This is a sit-down conversation with your patient to go through that full assessment with them, to go through and document that SOAP note. So start thinking about some of those clinical services that you want to incorporate, and definitely reach out, of course, if there's anything that DocStation can kind of help facilitate in that conversation as well. We did have one more kind of slide here to talk about, but given time constraints, and I do want to be respectful, we're right at almost that hour mark. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to kind of go through and answer some questions maybe that folks have, things like that. Or if you haven't had a chance to answer those poll questions that came through, make sure, you can go through and answer that. I do want to see, if this is something to where if you guys have individual questions for Andy or Jesus, feel free to kind of pop those into the chat as well. And I can kind of help moderate some of those to be able to do that. I want to answer, Michael, I know you've popped in a couple of questions about revenue here. I'd love to be sensitive to this as well, but I do want to kind of maybe give you some expectations or some things that we've seen as far as revenue opportunities and what folks have been able to earn. Now, this is not specific to either Linos or Saenz, but we have seen in the last year, so let's say 2024, we have seen several pharmacies earn in excess of over $100,000 in additional revenue. So this is on top of, of course, your vaccine or your prescription billing. But so just kind of maybe give some general numbers there. Again, not necessarily specific revenue numbers, but we have seen, I think there's, a good several pharmacies that have in excess of $100,000 in additional revenue. So hopefully that helps answer some of that question for you without getting too specific. The other thing that I do want to throw out here is a lot of folks are, and probably Andy and Jesus, y'all can speak to this, a lot of folks are nervous because they don't know what they don't know. And so, I think that being able to have a starting point, folks are often asking, I know they come in and ask me, what codes am I supposed to bill for? And so I'd like to talk a little bit around some of the codes that you guys have been billing for or billing in the last year, and really talk maybe about more what those codes are and what you've seen from them. There's three that I want to really touch on, outside of CGM or outside of that setup and training. And it's going to be more around like an E&M visit or an office type visit, which is a 99212, but you could do a little bit higher level depending on the medical complexity and decision making that you're making for that patient. Another one is preventative medicine that Andy, you've touched on a couple of times as well. Preventative medicine or preventative health does fall into several different categories, right? Vaccines, certain antibiotics, birth control consults, things like that. And then I would also, kind of touch on maybe some over the phone consults, which is a lot of times what folks don't really think about, folks meaning pharmacists, don't really think about how much extra time do you spend on the phone with a patient or another provider. That's my little warning. I've got about a couple minutes left here, but maybe have a quick, one sentence, Andy, about, what's been the most interesting find out of those three opportunities.
So in terms of Medicare, we'll have a little echo. Are y'all able to hear me?
Yes, you're fine. Go ahead.
In terms of like the most profitable code in terms for Medicare would be the phone call consultation, like the one that you mentioned. That's the 99441. That one was super profitable for 2024. Then we entered into 2025 and we got kind of blindsided, and Isaiah's nodding because this is like been the biggest research right now. And this morning I actually got a claim back that got paid in terms of a different telephone code that I was able to find on Codify. That one is a really good code because, like you said, like I don't know which pharmacies do delivery, right? But we do free of charge delivery. Obviously, you would want to profit from that delivery, and if you need to counsel that patient on the phone, that's where you would try to do an over the phone telephone counsel. And I'm seeing Rach right here, yeah, that you're mentioning it's like a discontinued code. So I'm trying to find different codes right now for telephone counsels because those are the ones that are most profitable. Like you verify a prescription, you're sending it with your delivery driver. So you want to make sure that you counsel them on the phone for anything important, right? A major drug interaction, penicillin allergy, this and that. So you can do those codes over the phone.
And how many times you have to coordinate with a different provider as well, right? And folks that are on long-term drug therapy, where who's the only person making sure that they're remaining adherent to their medications?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Jesus, I'd love to maybe pose this question to you as well, just with the time we have left. You know, some of the
for us, it's been the preventative medicine console for us because we've seen rejections with like a higher code of 99402, and we get we bill it at 99401, and it comes back paid. So there's different ways that we've been able to use this code, and there's been a lot of good success with it. So I know we're short on time, but that would be for us for sure.
That's great.
Yeah, for the most part, it would be like the preventative, which is like the 99401 and the 99212. Since we're doing counsels all the time, like you mentioned, birth control, ACE inhibitors, GLP agonists, those are the 99212. So those are pretty profitable codes that I would recommend everybody try. Because you're doing that counsel already for free of charge. So I would recommend that you at least test those two claims. If you want to wet your feet with those codes because those are really good profitable codes to at least test.
And don't waste the opportunity. We want to be providers and be recognized providers. Let's go ahead and do so before the opportunity gets taken away and given to somebody else. So let's go ahead and take advantage of it this year for sure.
I love that. I love that so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to stick on, I know that there's a couple other folks that are, still here and maybe want some more questions answered. But we are at the time mark today. So we'll definitely be following up with everybody. So if you didn't get a chance to get your question answered, or if you found that you had more after the session, feel free. We are going to follow up with everybody that was on today or everybody that registered. So you're definitely welcome to pop in some remaining questions that you have as well. With any of those, and we will send out an email template to everybody this afternoon for all of our attendees and all of our registrants as well. So I'm going to stick on for a couple extra minutes. If you didn't happen to get your question answered and you want to pop in some more, you're more than welcome to do that. But I understand time is of the essence here, so I know some of you guys got to go, so no problems there. But thank you so much to everybody that joined in, and I know Andy popped in some of those different codes there, the 98016 and 966. So there are a couple of new codes coming through. Being careful on making sure that you're understanding, is this a telehealth, meaning you have to have some sort of video audio, or can it be audio only over the phone, that type of thing. So we're also researching that as well at DocStation, what's out there, what's available. We'll put out some language too on our site as well. But really appreciate everybody's time as well. So Brian, just to make sure to say those codes again, some of the successful codes that are going around: 99212, 99401, which is preventative, or 99441 is a over the phone. At least it was active in 2024. 2025 is going to be kind of this new learning opportunity in the next couple of months here. But again,